Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a morning when paradise turned to fire. You're standing in warm island air, the scent of salt and hibiscus, waves sighing against white sand, the sound of ukuleles floating from a nearby porch. It's December 1941, and you're in Hawaii, just before the world decides to fall apart. Don't worry, you probably won't survive this, historically speaking. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time down in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stretch beneath a sky so blue it feels almost unreal. The palm trees sway, whispering secrets to one another. Honolulu hums in the background, distant chatter, car horns, and the lazy rhythm of a Sunday morning. It's the kind of peace that feels permanent, like nothing bad could possibly happen here. You smell breakfast from open kitchens, pineapple pancakes, roasted coffee, the sweetness of sugarcane drifting in from the fields. But beneath that calm, history's gears are already grinding. You walk along the harbor where the Pacific Fleet rests, shimmering and proud. Battleships like the Arizona, Nevada, and West Virginia bask in the sunlight, steel titans reflecting the peace they believe they've earned. Sailors lounge on deck, writing letters home, laughing about last night's dance at the YMCA. Some talk about the rumors, whispers of trouble brewing in the Pacific, but nobody really believes it. After all, this is paradise, and America is at peace. Historians still argue whether that calm was genuine innocence or willful blindness. Washington had decoded some Japanese transmissions hinting at tension, yet the idea of an attack on Hawaii seemed absurd. The U.S. believed if war ever came, it would strike far away, maybe the Philippines, maybe British Malaya, not here, not in their own backyard. You pause to watch a seagull circle lazily above the ships. A sailor below tosses a crust of bread into the water, laughing as it vanishes beneath a sudden flash of silver fish. You hear laughter, smell fuel oil from the docks, feel the breeze carrying faint radio music, a big band tune, light and dreamy. For a moment, it feels timeless. But across the ocean, a fleet is already moving. Thousands of miles north, 6 Japanese carriers cut through the dark waves like silent predators, their decks loaded with aircraft. Each pilot has studied a model of this harbor, practiced again and again to strike the ships you now see glinting in the sun. You don't know it, but they're closer than anyone suspects, less than a day away. A quirky tidbit: some soldiers in Honolulu spent that Saturday night watching the new movie Gone with the Wind at the base theater, completely unaware that by sunrise, their world would burn. One of them even joked in his diary about finally getting a peaceful weekend. Irony doesn't get darker than that. You stroll past a group of kids chasing each other near the shore. One boy holds a toy airplane, zooming it through the air with a sharp dive before crashing it into the sand. The others laugh. You can't help but feel a twinge. That innocent game mimics something none of them could imagine. The horizon looks endless, the ocean calm. You breathe it in, thinking how peaceful mornings like this always seem to hide the biggest storms. The wind carries the faintest hum. Maybe it's your imagination, maybe just the sea, but for a second, you swear it sounds like distant engines. Still, the world spins on as if tomorrow will always come. You walk back toward the base housing area, where wives hang laundry, soldiers read newspapers, and somewhere, a radio hums the cheerful voice of Bing Crosby. It's an ordinary morning in paradise, and that, more than anything, makes it unforgettable. You wake the next morning to the same rhythm of paradise. Gulls crying overhead, the warm scent of plumeria drifting through open windows, and the sound of ships' horns echoing faintly from the harbor. You stretch, yawn, and think about breakfast. Maybe coffee, maybe eggs and papaya. Nothing feels out of place. Everything is as it should be. But beneath that illusion, you can almost feel the clock ticking. Pearl Harbor lies glittering before you, an industrial marvel nestled in a volcanic island's embrace. Battleships rest like sleeping beasts, their gun barrels gleaming. The U.S. Pacific Fleet is considered invincible here, too powerful to surprise, too far to reach. Unassailable, some commanders say. You can almost hear the word echo, proud, heavy, and a little naive. The officers believe in numbers. The Navy boasts the biggest ships, the newest aircraft carriers, and the finest pilots in the Pacific. But on this Sunday morning, none of those advantages matter, because most of the carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, aren't even in port. The heart of America's naval power, ironically, is on exercise. What remains are the battleships, lined up neatly, a tempting target for anyone bold enough to try. You walk along the dock where sailors banter about football scores, weekend dates, and upcoming Christmas leave. A young ensign grins at you, tossing a coin. He tells his buddy, "If war ever comes, it won't come to us." You nod, half agreeing, because how could it? The Pacific is vast, and the Japanese fleet is supposed to be bottled up by embargoes and diplomacy. Historians still argue whether American intelligence simply underestimated Japan, or whether arrogance blinded them completely. A few sharp minds in Washington had noticed odd signals: Japanese diplomats destroying codebooks, their embassies sending frantic messages, but in Hawaii, it feels like gossip from another planet. The local mood is pure confidence wrapped in sunshine. A quirky fact: the sailors at Pearl jokingly called their own harbor Battleship Row, like it was a tourist attraction. Families from Honolulu would visit the observation areas just to see the gray steel giants. The Arizona even had a souvenir shop nearby selling postcards. It's hard not to marvel at the irony: tourists posing in front of ships that, within 24 hours, would lie beneath the same waters. You stroll past a row of officers' houses, white fences and tropical gardens glowing under the sun. Someone's wife is painting the porch, humming a Glenn Miller tune. Her husband, a lieutenant commander, sits inside reading the Sunday paper. You glance over his shoulder, headlines about the Japanese expansion in China, Europe's endless war, but the tone still feels distant, almost academic. "Not our problem," the subtext seems to whisper, but something feels off, doesn't it? Maybe it's the quiet, or the way the horizon looks sharper than usual. The trade winds pause for just a moment, and in that silence, you can almost sense the weight of history gathering. You try to shake the feeling, reminding yourself, this is Hawaii. People surf here, not worry about war. Back in the command buildings, a few officers exchange uneasy looks. They've read the latest dispatches, some intercepted Japanese codes, maybe even a hint that negotiations are breaking down. But communication lines are slow, and no one wants to sound alarmist. If Japan attacks, one officer mutters, they'll hit the Philippines. Another laughs, or maybe Alaska. Pearl Harbor never even enters the conversation. You find yourself gazing again at the anchored fleet, the proud Arizona, her massive guns aimed skyward, the Oklahoma steady and solid beside her. You notice how perfectly lined up they are, how symmetrical, how vulnerable. It's beautiful in a strange, fragile way, like glass figures waiting to be touched. Evening begins to creep in again. The harbor reflects orange light, ships casting long shadows over calm waters. You can hear faint strains of Moonlight Serenade playing from a nearby radio. Somewhere, a sailor proposes to his sweetheart under the palms, certain the world will stay just as it is forever. If only he knew how quickly forever ends. Across the vast Pacific, night cloaks another world. You find yourself drifting eastward, far from the laughter and lights of Oahu, into the cold discipline of Japan's Imperial Navy. The year is 1941, and the rising sun glows like an omen on every flag and uniform. You stand on the deck of the Akagi, flagship of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, a man who carries the weight of an empire on his shoulders and the quiet knowledge that he might destroy everything he loves. The sea air here is sharper, colder. The crew moves like a single heartbeat, precise, silent, efficient. No one laughs, no one talks idly. Every man knows something monumental is coming. And though you can't see land in any direction, the tension feels solid enough to touch. Admiral Yamamoto stares at the dark waves, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. He's not your typical warmonger. Educated at Harvard, he knows the United States, its industrial power, its will to fight. "If I am told to fight," he once warned, "I will run wild for 6 months, But after that, I cannot promise success. You can almost hear that line echo in his mind tonight. Historians still argue whether Yamamoto believed the attack could truly win the war, or if he launched it merely to buy Japan time. What's certain is that his plan was audacious, almost impossible. To strike Pearl Harbor meant crossing over 3,000 miles of open ocean in total radio silence, avoiding every patrol and radar, and launching a coordinated assault at dawn without being seen. No Navy had ever attempted anything like it. You walk among the pilots preparing for what's ahead. Some are barely 20 years old, boys with shaved heads and solemn eyes, clutching photographs of mothers or sweethearts. They bow before their aircraft, painted with bright red suns, each one gleaming under dim deck lights. There's pride here but also fear. The kind that hides under ritual and obedience. A quirky tidbit: Japanese carrier chefs serve the pilots a special meal before takeoff. White rice with raw egg and pickled vegetables, a kind of ceremonial breakfast. For many, it would be their last meal. One pilot even scribbled in his diary, "If I fall, let it be like a blossom returning to the tree." Poetic, fatalistic, and heartbreakingly sincere. You pass through the carrier corridors, hearing the low rumble of engines, the metallic clink of chains, the murmur of whispered prayers. Above deck, the commander's voice echoes over the loudspeakers. "Remember, success depends on surprise." Every syllable is like ice. You feel the enormity of it, an entire nation holding its breath across the sea, praying the Americans stay asleep a few hours longer. Far below, submarines glide silently toward Oahu, their orders clear: if the fleet tries to escape, sink them. The air itself feels heavy, as if the ocean understands what's about to unfold. The fleet moves northeast of Hawaii now, guided only by compass and discipline. The men are forbidden from smoking on deck or speaking loudly. Even the carrier radios are silent, communication reduced to colored flags and flashing lights. You look at the night sky, endless black, the stars piercing like cold needles. Somewhere below those same stars, Americans are dreaming of another peaceful Sunday morning. You pause near a young officer writing a letter. He smiles faintly, folds the paper, and slips it into his jacket. You wonder if it ever reached anyone. As dawn begins to faintly hint on the horizon, the tension sharpens to a blade's edge. The pilots gather on deck, faces blank with focus. They check their watches, their fuel lines, their torpedoes. Yamamoto's signal has already been sent: "Climb Mount Nitaka," the coded order to begin the attack. You can feel the world narrowing, time slowing, history pulling in a deep breath. The sky above Japan's fleet turns from indigo to steel gray. Engines begin to roar, softly at first, then rising together like a storm. And as the first planes lift from the carrier's decks, cutting through the dawn, the Pacific trembles. The storm from the rising sun has begun its flight. You float now between two worlds, the restless Pacific and the sleeping paradise that waits to be awakened. It's late Saturday night in Hawaii, and you can almost feel the distance between those moving carriers and this quiet harbor shrinking mile by mile. But here on Oahu, everything hums with the ordinary rhythm of peace. At an army post near the northern coast, two radar operators, George Elliott and Joseph Lockard, sit in a dim room filled with the hum of machines. They're young, bored, half awake. It's early, too early. They've been told to practice, to keep their eyes on the screen just in case. Around 7 a.m., one of them suddenly straightens up. There's a massive blip. Not one or two planes, but dozens, maybe more than 100, closing in fast from the north. The green dots spill across the screen like raindrops on glass. Elliot hesitates, rubs his eyes, then calls it in. The duty officer, a lieutenant who's filling in for the weekend, listens politely, then waves it off. "Don't worry about it," he says. "Probably a flight of B-17s coming in from the mainland." You can almost hear the shrug through the static. Historians still argue whether that single dismissal changed everything. If someone had sounded the alarm, if fighters had scrambled, if anti-aircraft guns had been manned, maybe, just maybe, the damage could have been less. But history doesn't care much for if. You leave the radar station and drift toward the harbor. The sun hasn't yet risen, but the air is warm and sweet. Honolulu stirs slowly awake. A few sailors jog along the pier, families set breakfast tables, and a church bell rings faintly somewhere up the hill. The harbor looks like glass, the reflections of battleships painting the water silver blue. A quirky tidbit: one of the harbor sentries that morning spotted an unidentified submarine periscope near the entrance around 6:30 a.m. He reported it, and the destroyer USS Ward fired the first shot of the Pacific War, sinking the intruder. The report went up the chain of command, and then disappeared into paperwork limbo. Nobody wanted to overreact before breakfast. You can't help but shake your head. The irony is sharp. Warnings appear everywhere, in the sky, in the sea, in decoded messages, yet each one dissolves under the warm Hawaiian sun like mist. Inside the naval base's intelligence office, a few officers read a new dispatch from Washington. Japan's embassy in D.C. has been ordered to deliver a 14-part message to the U.S. government at exactly 1 p.m. Eastern Time. No one says it aloud, but they all know that's dawn in Hawaii. Could mean something, one officer murmurs. Or nothing, replies another. The papers are set aside. Meanwhile, in the barracks, sailors stretch, shave, and laugh about the coming day. You pass a man writing to his wife, another fixing his shoes, and a third asleep on a cot with the Sunday comics spread over his chest. There's peace in their unawareness, the kind you almost envy. The clock strikes 7:30. Across the Pacific, the Japanese attack force has already spotted land. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda peers through his binoculars, heart racing. He sees the harbor, exactly as they'd hoped. Ships anchored, planes lined up wingtip to wingtip, defenses asleep. He turns to his men and shouts, "Tora! Tora! Tora!" The coded phrase for complete surprise. You glance up. The sky is still empty. No roar of engines, no thunder of bombs yet. Just the cry of seabirds and the shimmer of morning heat. But in those few minutes, you sense it, the invisible line between peace and chaos thinning. Back at the radar post, the screen is now clear again. The operators shut down the set, grab their jackets, and head to breakfast. Lockhart yawns and jokes, guess it was nothing. You watch him leave, the door swinging closed behind him. Outside, the first rays of sunlight spill over the mountains, washing the island in gold. It's beautiful, heartbreakingly so. You take a deep breath, tasting salt and flowers on the breeze. For one last, fragile moment, Hawaii dreams on. The world hasn't changed, not yet. The sky begins to pale, a soft pink bleeding into gold over the Kula Mountains. You're standing at the edge of Pearl Harbor, the air still cool, the sea perfectly still. The island seems to hold its breath, the kind of quiet that makes you think the world could stay like this forever. You watch the harbor stretch before you, dotted with gray battleships sleeping at anchor. The Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, and the rest sit motionless, their decks slick with morning dew. Sailors are just starting to stir, some hoisting flags, others scrubbing decks, a few still snoring below. A bugle call echoes softly across the water, a sound so ordinary it feels almost sacred. You glance toward Ford Island, where aircraft line up neatly, wings glinting in the early light. They look like toys, peaceful and harmless, parked close together to prevent sabotage. The irony stings. Far off to the north, invisible to everyone here, a dark swarm moves closer, 183 Japanese aircraft cutting through the dawn, their engines a low growl against the wind. Fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes form a perfect V, like arrows ready to be loosed. The pilots stare straight ahead, faces unreadable behind goggles. Many have small flags tied to their arms, symbols of courage or fate. The first wave is minutes away. Historians still argue whether the Japanese could have called it off. A last-minute diplomatic breakthrough, a late message, it's possible, they say. But by this hour, the sun is rising, and history has already chosen its direction. You step closer to the harbor water. It's so clear you can see tiny fish darting beneath the surface. Somewhere behind you, church bells begin to ring for morning service. You hear the laughter of children, the bark of a dog. It's all so normal, painfully normal. A quirky tidbit: Some of the sailors on the Arizona were still in their pajamas when the attack began. One officer later recalled that he was brushing his teeth when he looked out the porthole and saw the first explosions. "I thought it was a drill," he said. "Then the sky caught fire. But right now, there's no fire. Only sunlight glinting on steel and the smell of sea salt." You see a group of nurses walking toward the hospital, chatting about the day's shift. On another pier, a sailor buys a newspaper from a boy on a bicycle. The headline reads, "Japan envoys in Washington for final peace talks." You exhale. The cruelest kind of peace is the one that comes right before the fall. Above you, the first faint hum whispers across the air. It's easy to miss, a tremor more than a sound. You tilt your head, unsure. It grows louder, closer. Then, a glint, sunlight catching on something metallic far above the horizon. One, two, then dozens. You squint, your heartbeat quickening. Birds? No, not birds. At 7:49 a.m., the first formation breaks through the clouds. Planes with red circles on their wings, the rising sun. You barely have time to react before the leader radios two words that slice through the morning. "Tora! Tora! Tora!" The attack has begun. Engines scream overhead as dive bombers peel downward like falling stars. Torpedoes slice through the water, leaving white trails toward the anchored ships. The air shatters with the first explosion, a thunderclap that shakes your bones. A plume of smoke erupts from Battleship Row, and in that instant, paradise dies. You stumble back as shock waves ripple through the harbor. Sirens begin to wail, sailors shout orders, and the sky darkens with black smoke. The peaceful morning vanishes under a storm of fire and steel. But here, in this exact heartbeat, the moment between stillness and chaos, you understand what history always hides, how quiet the world is right before it changes forever. The sky breaks open. You barely have time to blink before the entire harbor erupts into thunder. The first bombs hit with a sound that doesn't just echo, it tears. The Arizona shudders as a torpedo slams into her port side, the shockwave rolling through the water like an earthquake. Within seconds, another bomb finds her forward magazine. A massive, molten explosion that lifts the ship from the sea. You feel the blast in your chest, a hot wind that seems to suck the air from your lungs. Flames burst skyward, a pillar of fire so high it catches the clouds. The heat singes your face even from here. Sailors scream, leap overboard, claw for the surface as burning oil spreads across the water. It's not a harbor anymore, it's an inferno. Above, the Japanese planes roar in deadly rhythm. Dive bombers shriek as they drop payloads, machine guns rattle across decks, and torpedo bombers skim so low their shadows ripple across the waves. The air smells of metal, gasoline, and smoke. Historians still argue about how such precision was possible. Some say it was months of practice in secrecy, others claim it was divine luck, that the Japanese pilots couldn't believe their own success. Every ship was exactly where their charts said it would be. Every plane on Ford Island lined up perfectly for destruction. You run, or maybe you float through the chaos, past sailors dragging the wounded, past medics shouting for morphine, past men who've lost their uniforms, their sense of direction, their hope. A sailor screams your name, you don't know how he knows it, and tosses you a hose. You spray seawater onto the flames, but it's like spitting at a volcano. A quirky tidbit, one of the first Americans to fire back was a cook aboard the USS California. With no training and still wearing his apron, he grabbed an anti-aircraft gun and shot down a Japanese plane. His name was Dory Miller, an African-American mess attendant who became one of the first heroes of the war. Later, he would receive the Navy Cross. You duck as another bomb explodes nearby. The ground shakes. A blast wave hurls you into a wall. When you open your eyes, everything is dust and fire. The Oklahoma is rolling over, capsizing in slow motion, trapping hundreds inside. You hear them pounding, muffled, rhythmic, desperate, from beneath the hull. That sound will never leave you. Everywhere you look, the scene fractures into fragments. A sailor trying to drag his friend through flaming oil. A nurse sprinting barefoot through shards of glass. A chaplain kneeling beside a dying man, whispering a prayer he can barely finish. Above, a Zero swoops low, machine guns chattering. You dive behind a crate, clutching your ears as splinters fly. The smell of cordite fills the air, sharp and choking. From the distance, the voice of the base radio crackles through the chaos. Air raid Pearl Harbor, this is not a drill. You look up, and the sky itself seems alive, filled with smoke trails, explosions, and streaks of sunlight breaking through the haze. It's surreal, almost cinematic, until you remember that none of this is a movie. Historians still argue about the second wave, whether it was necessary or just overkill. When it came, it pounded what little was left. The Nevada tried to break free, engines roaring, but she became a target immediately, bombs striking her deck until she grounded herself in shallow water to keep from sinking. You stumble toward the shore. The oil-coated waves lap against your boots, carrying bits of debris, helmets, letters, a single white shoe. The air hums with fire and screams. Somewhere nearby, a band of sailors starts to sing, their voices raw, maybe to drown out the terror. The melody is broken, trembling, God bless America, twisted into a plea. You stand there, trembling as the attack stretches on. 90 minutes that feel like eternity. Then, at last, the planes turn away, their bellies empty, their shadows fading toward the horizon. The silence that follows is worse than the noise. It's the kind of silence that feels alive, heavy, suffocating, endless. You look around the harbor, once a symbol of might, now a graveyard. Ships burn, the sea bleeds black, and the morning sun struggles through the smoke like an exhausted god. And in that moment you realize, the world will never wake up the same again. Smoke rolls across the harbor like a living thing, gray, oily, and thick enough to choke the sun. You wipe soot from your face, eyes stinging as the world swims between orange flame and black shadow. It's still morning, but it feels like dusk. The sounds of the attack linger, the distant whine of engines, the sharp crack of collapsing metal, the faint, terrible cries for help that echo across the water. You wade into the shallows, the oil clinging to your boots like tar. Pieces of ships float past, planks, helmets, a scorched life ring that once bore the name Arizona. A sailor beside you coughs hard, his uniform soaked and blackened. He's alive, but barely. Together, you drag another man from the surf, his skin burned, his breath shallow. There's no time to think, only to move, to act, to survive. The harbor's once proud lineup of ships is now a graveyard. The Oklahoma lies belly up, her hull jutting from the water like the spine of some dead beast. Men are trapped inside, pounding the steel for rescue. You hear it, dull, rhythmic, heartbreaking. Rescuers rush toward the sound, cutting torches blazing as they fight through twisted metal. Each spark lights up the horror in brief flashes. The Arizona is gone, split apart, sunk in seconds after that cataclysmic blast. More than 1,000 souls remain entombed within her steel tomb. The West Virginia burns fiercely, her decks collapsing inward, while the California lists, half submerged, her masts still reaching toward a sky gone black. Historians still argue about what moment broke the illusion of safety, whether it was the first explosion, the sinking of the Arizona, or the moment the smoke rose so high it could be seen from Honolulu miles away. Whatever it was, the myth of America's invincibility vanished before breakfast that day. You stumble through debris toward the shore hospital, where nurses and corpsmen work with frantic precision. The air reeks of antiseptic and smoke. A doctor yells for more bandages. A young nurse's hands shake as she ties off a wound. The floor is slick, not with water, but with blood and oil. A quirky tidbit. One nurse later recalled how they used sheets torn into strips for makeshift bandages and sterilized needles over a candle flame. "We had to choose who to save," she said quietly. "There just weren't enough of us." Outside, a small band of Marines tries to regroup, rifles clutched tight. A sergeant barks orders, his voice hoarse, "Watch the skies. They might come back." Every shadow makes them flinch, every sound could be another attack. It's the kind of tension that twists your insides. You glance back toward the harbor. Fires still rage on the water, spreading slowly toward the fuel tanks at the edge of the base. A group of sailors forms a bucket line, passing seawater hand to hand, though they know it's hopeless. But they do it anyway. Maybe because doing something, anything, keeps them from breaking. The chaplain from earlier kneels beside a row of covered bodies, whispering the same prayer over and over, voice trembling, "Lord, receive them." You notice his Bible is burned along one edge. Through the smoke, you spot a sailor you've seen before, maybe from the docks, maybe from that calm morning. He's sitting on the ground, staring blankly at the flames, one hand holding a photo of his wife. He's not crying. He's just gone, hollowed out by the moment. Nearby, a jeep skids to a halt. An officer jumps out, shouting orders, "Get communications up. Find every plane still flyable." Panic bleeds into purpose. The U.S. Pacific Fleet, shattered and smoking, begins to stir with rage. The air is thick with heat and grief. You stand in the middle of it all, the dying embers of paradise, and realize you've seen the world flip inside out. Later, reports will call it a sneak attack. Some will call it a tragedy. But standing here, amid the wreckage, it feels like something far deeper, like the sound of innocence shattering. You look toward the horizon where the Japanese planes have vanished. The sky there is strangely beautiful, streaked with orange and gray, like a sunset painted in ash. You take one long breath, the smoke burning your lungs. The world is quiet again. But it's not the peace you knew. It's the silence that follows when everything you trusted is gone. The attack ends, but the horror doesn't. You wander through the haze, through the sound of water boiling over wreckage, through the ringing that won't leave your ears. The harbor smolders like a dying furnace, ships still burning, oil spreading, fire eating its way across the surface. Every few seconds, a dull explosion echoes from deep inside a sinking hull. You stop counting after a while. Smoke clings to everything, to the palms, to your clothes, to your soul. The air tastes like metal and ash. Around you, survivors stumble through what looks less like a military base and more like a graveyard built overnight. At the edge of the dock, a young nurse named Annie steadies herself against a crate, her face streaked with soot and tears. She's been running since dawn, stitching wounds, carrying stretchers, refusing to stop. Her hands shake as she looks at the water, black, bubbling, littered with debris and bodies. She whispers something you can barely hear, "It smells like death." You want to comfort her, but there's nothing to say. You follow her toward the makeshift triage zone where soldiers, sailors, and civilians lie side by side. Doctors move among them, exhausted but relentless. Someone shouts for morphine, someone else begs for clean water. You kneel to help, your knees sinking into mud and oil. The human part of this, the crying, the praying, the silence of those who can't speak, cuts deeper than any explosion. Historians still argue about what it felt like to live those first hours after the attack, whether it was fear, anger, or disbelief that dominated. But the people here don't have time to analyze. They only move, react, survive. A quirky tidbit: a Honolulu radio station that morning was supposed to play a children's show. Instead, its announcer began reading emergency instructions, and for the rest of the day, he broadcast nonstop, relaying messages from desperate families searching for loved ones. Later, he confessed that he didn't even realize he'd skipped lunch, dinner, and midnight entirely. "I just kept talking," he said. "If I stopped, I'd start crying." You help load the wounded onto trucks headed toward the base hospital. One man grips your wrist, eyes wild. "Did we get them?" he asks. You hesitate. "They're gone," you say softly. He nods, then closes his eyes. Relief or resignation, you can't tell. You walk past a hangar-turned-morgue, its floor lined with bodies covered in tarps. A chaplain moves slowly down the row, murmuring names when he can, prayers when he can't. Someone hands him a dog tag still warm from the fire. He pockets it without a word. In the distance, the city of Honolulu watches in stunned silence. Civilians gather on rooftops, some clutching binoculars, others clasping hands. They can see the smoke from miles away, a black serpent twisting into the sky. A woman whispers, "They'll come for the city next." Fear spreads faster than the flames. By late afternoon, rumors spiral. Some say Japanese troops have landed on the beaches. Others swear they saw paratroopers dropping from the clouds. None of it's true, But panic doesn't wait for facts. Gas stations close. Schools lock down. Men with rifles take up positions along the shore, eyes fixed on the horizon. Back at the harbor, the fires finally begin to die. The sun sinks low, turning the smoke a deep crimson. You stand among the ruins, watching as rescue crews pull men from the water, some alive, most not. Their faces are blackened, unrecognizable. Yet their dog tags glint in the fading light, each one a name, a story, a world. A small group gathers near the shore, sailors and nurses, their clothes torn, their eyes hollow. No one speaks for a while. Then, softly, one of them begins to hum, the same tune that played on a radio that morning. Others join in, their voices weak but steady. The song drifts over the harbor like a fragile thread of hope. You close your eyes. The fire crackles, the water hisses, and the wind carries the scent of burning fuel out to sea. For the first time since dawn, the island exhales. The worst is over, but the ache has only just begun. By the next morning, the island has changed. The palms still sway, the waves still curl, but the air feels heavier, thick with disbelief and a grief so vast it almost hums. You wake to the echo of sirens that no longer mean danger, just the endless tallying of what's been lost. You drift through the streets of Honolulu, where civilians line up to donate blood, to volunteer, to do anything that might matter. Children peek through shop windows at soldiers in bandages. Some still clutch toys, not understanding why their fathers haven't come home. The newspapers scream, "War," in black ink, but it doesn't feel real yet, more like a headline from some alternate universe that accidentally printed itself into this one. Then the radio crackles. The president's voice fills the air, calm, measured, heavy with resolve. You listen as Franklin D. Roosevelt declares December 7th, a date which will live in infamy. Every syllable seems to anchor the chaos, turning shock into purpose. His words are part grief, part thunder. And as he finishes, "We will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God," you can almost feel the collective breath of a nation being drawn in, held, and released. Historians still argue whether Roosevelt already knew Japan might strike somewhere in the Pacific, whether intelligence could have stopped it, or if it was simply a tragic inevitability, a perfect storm of arrogance, delay, and human error. But in this moment, you sense none of that matters to the people listening. For them, the war has come home. Across the ocean, in Tokyo, the mood is triumphant but uneasy. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the man who designed the attack, stares out over a quiet bay. He's no stranger to victory, but tonight his face is lined with something else, dread. "I fear all we have done," he writes later, "is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." A quirky tidbit. In some American cities, barbershops offered victory haircuts, short, sharp, military-style trims, the very next day. Movie theaters replayed newsreels of Pearl Harbor before every show. Even comic book heroes like Superman and Captain America suddenly turned their fists toward the Axis powers. Pop culture, propaganda, and patriotism fused overnight. You stroll through the naval yard again, now eerily organized amid ruins. Cranes pull half-sunken ships upright, divers vanish into the depths, and officers pace with clipboards, calculating what's salvageable. The USS Nevada, the only battleship to get underway during the attack, lies beached and battered, but her flag still flutters defiantly. A crewman tells you, "She'll fight again." And somehow, you believe him. The war machine begins to stir. Across the mainland, factories roar to life, women swap aprons for welding masks, and posters declare, "We can do it." You picture the map stretching before you, the Pacific now a chessboard of consequence. The attack has done more than destroy ships, it's reshaped destiny itself. You catch whispers among soldiers boarding transport ships. Fear, yes, but also determination. One says, "They wanted us asleep. Now we're awake." It's less a boast and more a vow. Meanwhile, in Washington, policymakers scramble. The U.S. joins Britain and the Allies formally. Germany and Italy declare war in response. The entire world shifts gears almost overnight, gears grinding into motion that will not stop for years. Historians call it the day globalization turned violent. when the 20th century's threads finally knotted into total war. As evening falls, you find yourself by the harbor once more. Fires are out now. The water reflects a bruised sky, pinks, grays, and black streaks from oil still leaking beneath the surface. You kneel by the rail, touch the cool metal, and feel the hum of engines still being repaired below deck. The harbor no longer feels like a place. It feels like a memory taking physical form. Somewhere nearby, a bugle sounds taps. The final note trembles, hangs in the air, and fades into silence. Around you, sailors remove their caps, heads bowed. The wind off the ocean feels colder tonight. You realize that in one day, innocence didn't just die, it enlisted. And as darkness folds over the Pacific, you can almost hear the giant stirring, its eyes opening at last. The days that follow Pearl Harbor are a whirlwind, though they move at the pace of a nightmare stretched over months. You float through the aftermath, seeing communities reshaped overnight. Barracks are rebuilt, hospitals restocked, and the Navy scrambles to repair what it can. But it's more than steel and wood that's broken. It's trust, certainty, and a sense of invulnerability. You walk along the streets of Honolulu, noting the changes in ordinary life. Posters demand vigilance. Neighborhood watch groups form almost immediately. Families whisper anxiously about Japanese submarines off the coast. Shops that once sold pineapple candy now stock bandages and water rations. Schools close for drills. Every child learns to duck and cover, though none can truly imagine the violence of the morning you just lived through. Historians still argue about the broader consequences, whether the attack sped America's entry into a global war or simply accelerated an inevitable conflict. Regardless, mobilization is breathtaking. Factories in the mainland roar with production, women become welders and riveters, men enlist en masse, and military planners redraw every strategy map in sight. You watch convoys assemble and trains roll out with supplies, each movement a heartbeat in a nation suddenly awake. A quirky tidbit: some families in California painted the walls of their homes with black tar to prepare for possible air raids, and local Boy Scouts helped dig foxholes in backyards, imagining themselves as junior soldiers. Children recited emergency drills while simultaneously sneaking candy, the mundane blending with fear. You glide into the military barracks, where officers discuss what came next. Lessons are drawn rapidly. The vulnerability of battleships in harbor leads to a re-evaluation of naval strategy worldwide. Aircraft carriers become the true crown jewels of the fleet, as the Navy learns that speed and mobility often outweigh armor and cannons. At the same time, harsh measures ripple through communities. Japanese Americans are suddenly under suspicion, and Executive Order 9066 forces thousands into internment camps. Families are uprooted, businesses abandoned, and lives disrupted, all in the name of national security. You feel a bitter twist. The attack has reshaped society, not just the harbor. Across the Pacific, the war tightens its grip. The U.S. strikes back in small engagements, testing Japan's defenses, learning the contours of battle. Roosevelt's speeches, imbued with conviction and outrage, rally a nation still reeling from shock. The moral weight of the conflict becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't just strategy and territory, it's vengeance, survival, and the fight for a way of life. You walk the repaired docks at Pearl Harbor, now cleared of debris but still etched with memory. Survivors tell stories to younger sailors, heroic feats, narrow escapes, and quiet acts of compassion amid chaos. Every story threads into a larger tapestry of remembrance, a collective effort to make sense of the senseless. Somewhere nearby, a group of officers discusses Yamamoto's words, that awakening a sleeping giant would have consequences no one could contain. The irony hangs like a cloud over the harbor, tangible and heavy. You can feel it yourself, as if history itself has planted its hand on your shoulder. And yet, amid the shadows and the rebuilding, a pulse persists. A defiance, a determination, and a stubborn insistence that life, ordinary, quiet life, will continue. You watch as a small boat carries supplies to a moored destroyer, its wake rippling like a promise. The world has shifted, but it has not surrendered. You return to Pearl Harbor years later, though the island itself has barely changed. The palms sway, the ocean laps gently against the shore, and the mountains rise in quiet dignity. But the harbor tells a different story, a story written in steel, stone, and memory. You walk along the memorials, your footsteps soft on the concrete paths, and you notice how water reflects the sky like a mirror of the past. The USS Arizona Memorial floats above the sunken hull, white and serene. You peer over the railing and see the dark shape beneath, silent and eternal. It's strange, the way the water seems peaceful even as it cradles so many lives lost in violence. Names etched in stone glint in the sunlight, more than 1,000 men, each a story, a heartbeat, a family left behind. You reach out almost instinctively, as if you can touch their memory through the cool metal. Historians still argue about how we remember Pearl Harbor. Some say the focus is too much on the shock and not enough on the strategic lessons. Others argue that it's the human stories, the heroism, the fear, the resilience, that truly matter. Standing here, it's easy to see why the human story dominates. You wander further along the memorial walkway, passing smaller plaques commemorating ships like the Oklahoma, West Virginia, and California. Each one carries its own tale of survival, tragedy, and the quiet courage of ordinary men facing unimaginable circumstances. Sailors, nurses, civilians, all converge in memory. A quirky tidbit: every year, visitors drop coins, flowers, and small tokens into the water around the memorial. Some are left by veterans, others by families who never knew the names etched above. You notice a small toy airplane floating gently, bobbing like a tiny echo of the attacks decades ago. You pause at the visitor center, where photographs show the harbor before, during, and after the attack. The contrast is jarring: peaceful morning, violent destruction, and then the long, slow rebuilding. You trace the faces in the images, some terrified, some resolute, some frozen mid-action. The images feel alive, almost as if the past is breathing beside you. Walking back toward the shoreline, you see the sun lowering into the Pacific, casting long golden reflections across the water. The memorial, the harbor, the mountains, they all hum together in a quiet rhythm. You can almost hear whispers of the past, a sailor's laugh, a nurse's prayer, the roar of engines long gone. The ocean laps gently against the memorial's pillars. You breathe deeply, tasting salt and memory. For a moment, the world feels reconciled, grief and beauty, memory and peace, all coexisting. You realize the ripples of December 7, 1941, continue to echo, carrying lessons and legacies into the present, reminding everyone who visits that history is not just in books, it's alive in the water, the wind, and the quiet courage of those who endured. And as you stand there, letting the wind sweep across your face, you understand something profound, that even amidst the deepest tragedy, the human spirit continues to ripple outward, touching every new generation, whispering a warning and a hope and a promise. The sun dips lower, painting the horizon in soft shades of amber and rose. You sit on the edge of the memorial, legs dangling over the water, letting the cool breeze wash over your skin. The waves lap gently against the sunken hull beneath you, a rhythmic, calming pulse that almost erases the chaos of memory. You take a slow breath, noticing the subtle scent of salt mingling with the faint aroma of tropical flowers carried by the evening air. Around you, everything is quiet now. The birds return to their perches, the rustle of palm fronds creates a lullaby, and the distant hum of the island settles into a steady, soothing rhythm. The memorial stands in serene silence, yet it speaks volumes, whispering stories of courage, loss, and resilience. You imagine the sailors aboard the ships, their faces etched with determination and fear, now at rest in the embrace of the ocean. Historians may debate tactics, outcomes, and strategic decisions, but here, in the gentle twilight, the human story is undeniable. You let your thoughts drift over the ordinary lives forever changed that morning. The nurses who ran toward danger, the cooks who became heroes, the families waiting for letters that never came. And yet, even in tragedy, there is life continuing. Children laughing somewhere, a gentle breeze moving over calm waters, the quiet persistence of dawns yet to come. You close your eyes, letting your body and mind sink into the soft cadence of the harbor. Time feels suspended, each breath stretching long and slow. The sun's final light fades into a tender purple, and the horizon seems to stretch into infinity. You realize that this moment, calm, reflective, reverent, is a reminder that even after the darkest hours, the world endures, and so do we. Breathe deeply, feel the gentle sway beneath you, and allow the echoes of history to fade into the soft rhythm of peace.